Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing studies in Christian theology. We're going to take a look at Christian apologetics from an 18th century philosopher, Joseph Butler, and his book, The Analogy of Religion, published in 1906, but it is an 18th century position of very in-depth Christian apologetics through what he terms the way of analogy, through the way of analogy. And what we want to do first is take a look at his introduction before we get into the meat of the text. He does have a very detailed introduction to kind of give the reader a framework within which to approach his main text. And so we've entitled this introduction, The Way of Analogy. Let's take a look at block 1. Butler says the problem that exists for humanity is the imperfect knowledge of probability. Probability is variable in degrees. There's the fourfold degrees of probability. It begins with a likeness, then moves on to presumption, then on to opinion, and then finally conviction or moral certainty. Probability is mediated through the experience of repetition. And through repetition, probability acquires instances of form, and these repeated eidos forms result in a posited likeliness of the true. So it's through the repetition of eidos forms that there's a probable positing of a likeliness of the true. We posit a probability. But probability can only yield up an extrapolated expectation. From the likely truths, principles are extrapolated, and upon these principles we posit the judgments of expectation and our hopes. So probability is all about the repetition of the eidos forms in sensate experience that we can extrapolate and thereby form principles, and from those principles posit judgments of expectation. Now the middle moment, block 2, is going to be the most important moment. It always is, but we're going to take a look at his proposed thesis, the way of analogy. And he posits the question, is there an analogous relation between the system of providence acquired through revelation and the system of experience acquired through reason? And of course, his theoretical position is that there is an analogy between the two. And he begins with 3 axioms of self-evident truth. Number 1, the axiom of abstraction. Abstract reasonings may be drawn from sensate observation. Then we move on to the axiom of analogy. Abstractions may be related to other abstract facts. And then 3, axiom of coordination. Analogy may lead to the coordination of sensate experience with a general ontology, which for Butler is a transcendent ontology. So for Butler, the problem of probability is answered with the thesis of the way of analogy. And it begins with self-evident axioms of truth. 3 axioms of self-evident truth. And then from there we can take a look at the horizon of expectation through this system he is proposing. He proposes an ethics of the right. Humanity is perfected as happy. Government by punishment is to be negated. And the designed end of providence is virtue. God is posited as moral perfection. And then 2, the category of divine providence abbreviates the concept of the laws of nature. Divine providence equals the moral system of nature, and the teleosis aim of providence is to reach the most virtuous humanity that can be reached, to reach the most virtuous humanity. Now before we look at that little flow chart that I've got enclosed within block 3, let's move on to block 4 and take a look at the positing of the model of administration, because that's what the triad leads us to. The positing of the model of what he calls the model of administration. That is his sign model, note 1. Through the way of analogy, we can form a model of the posited rules of administration. How is actuality to be governed? How is experience governed? Is governed according to rules of administration. And we can posit that model through the way of analogy. And then note 2, Phronesis says ethical positing. Through practical wisdom, we are to compare actual course of things or experience with the moral system of nature, which is called providence. So we compare experience with providence. And that, of course, presumes that every individual holds some type of an ontology. That is presumed in this system, that we begin with some shape of providence, some shape of an ontology. And because of that, we compare experience with providence. Now, note 3, the result of comparison is internalized and compared to the beliefs that we hold subjectively concerning Christianity. And then you move on to note 4, we enter into the workspace of analogy to work up any revisions that need to take place. And that will eventually result in a revised positing of the next model of administration. So our result of comparison takes us into the workspace of analogy. Now the true in note 5, belief is revised as principles of the divine conduct. After coming out of that workspace, we do define principles of divine conduct. And then note 6, the fourth axiom is of teleosis. Humanity is appointed to live in a future state. Present sensate existence is trial existence. Our trial existence is measured against the dispensation of providence, which is a schema system. It is systematic. Therefore, the dispensation of providence will include a schema system, an objective publication of that schema in reality, and an afforded subjective proof that's acquired through the way of analogy. That's the overarching structure of his system. There is a schema system of providence. There's an objective publication of that schema in actuality. There's an afforded subjective proof available through the way of analogy. Now we can take a look at that inserted little flowchart I've got in block 3. And it's the six steps of his dialectic. Basically, humanity holds the true concerning the principles of the divine conduct or providence. From there, we begin with that beginning understanding of providence, the beginning understanding of the ontology of being. Then we compare experience and providence. From that comparison, we posit a model of administration to guide and to lead experience toward the actualization of providence. Out of that positing becomes a note 4, return. Result is internalized in the workspace of analogy. And then 5, the principles of divine conduct are revised accordingly. And then 6, a revised model of administration is formed and posited, and we go through the cycle again. So in his introduction, Joseph Butler gives us the problem of probability, the thesis of the way of analogy, which is to lead us toward a working out of the actualization of providence, bringing it into being in actuality through the positing of a model of administration. Through the positing of a model of administration. By positing that model through word and action, we actually can influence history and we can influence actuality. And as we get involved in that process, we will continue to work in the workspace of analogy and revise those principles of divine conduct, or the principles of providence. And so he gives us the path he's going to take to do his apologetics for Christianity. And if you look at it, if you think about it, he's taking the path that is given by the Apostle Paul in Athens, when Paul said that that being an agnostic is without excuse, because nature itself testifies to the truth in Christ, to the truth of the Messiah. And so Paul says that we can even begin with the experience, and we are given more than enough evidence for belief in God and for knowing God through the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And Joseph Butler says that he's going to begin with experience. He's going to begin with that initial understanding of providence, which he calls those principles of divine conduct, but then you're going to go immediately into experience. And through the workspace of analogy, the individual can actually validate the precepts of Christianity and can form a definitive apologetics. He calls this the analogy of religion, natural and revealed, because he begins with the natural, passes through the revealed, and those two remain dialectically interrelated through his entire system. But it is based on modeling. It's all about modeling that model of administration in column 4. So the trilogy, the triune teaching of negating probability, affirming the way of analogy, and the horizon of virtue, leads to the positing of a model of administration. That's where it leads. Negation of probability, affirmation of the way of analogy, which reaches the horizon of virtue, all leads to positing the model of administration. That's going to wrap up our introduction to the analogy of religion, but I think we can look forward to a very in-depth look at Christian apologetics. We've only really just had a glimpse of apologetics in the church congregation so far, but now we're going to get an in-depth, true presentation of Christian apologetics, Christian philosophical apologetics.